All right, do the sporting, CNN reporting underlining that Donald Trump has a new legal gambit. He's back in court on Friday, but sources tell CNN he also wants to pit federal judges against each other in a bid to push his trials until after the November election. CNN's Caitlin Polans broke this story for us. Caitlin, I mean, we knew that it was all about delay, but this is the plan to make that happen.
And there is a plan.
Yeah.
So the sources I've spoken with are saying that Trump really does not want these two federal criminal cases he's facing to go to trial. He has the New York hush money case on the calendar for the end of March, spanning into May. So that'll take up a chunk of his calendar in court. And then after that, there's a big question mark. Will one of these cases go to trial? Right now, his documents case in Florida, the classified records mishandling case, that's a federal case. It's scheduled to start in late May. But this Friday, his attorneys are looking to ask for a delay. That's what the sources are telling me. And they want to just move it gradually. They want to move it maybe a month or two into July.
All right, people, welcome back to Jack Mockler. New York has placed legal claims on Trump's signature properties, including his Manhattan skyscraper, totaling nearly $500 million in judgments. The clock is ticking on what could be a devastating blow to his brand and legacy. This isn't some abstract legal concept or political theater. This is real. It's happening right now, and it could fundamentally reshape how we think about power, accountability, and whether anyone, even a sitting president, can truly escape the consequences of their actions. Let me paint you a picture of exactly what's at stake here. You know those iconic Trump buildings that dominate the Manhattan skyline? The ones he constantly brags about at rallies? The ones with his name in gigantic golden letters that scream wealth and success.
And then because that case is so complicated, once July rolls around, they hope that they have to move it back again. So the idea would be to elbow out, not just having him go to trial in that case, but also to make sure he's not going to trial in the January 6th case, 2020 election before Judge Tanya Chutkan. They want to ice her out. That's what one source told me.
Yeah, I mean, I get this case over here, so I can't do this one over here, and so on. You can understand how this can snowball out of control. I mean, you have, we should point out, we have some breaking news that's just come in the last several minutes. New breaking news on Trump. He's going to file this appeal in the civil fraud case. What can you tell us?
Yeah, he is filing this appeal in his civil fraud case out of New York. He wants to hold off having to pay that $454 million. So it's $100 million in interest and the other judgment. Yeah. The clock is ticking for him, so he is going to have to get relief pretty quickly. There's a 30-day window, basically, from last week where he's going to have to start paying that money. And he certainly doesn't want to pay it, and he also doesn't want to be banned from doing business in New York.
Yeah. Breaking but not shocking news.
Not at all.
We have our other legal eagle here. Paula Reed is here.
At this very moment, they have government judgment liens attached to them. That's not metaphorical language. That's not political spin. That's actual legal paperwork filed in government offices, creating a real claim against these properties that could ultimately result in them being seized and sold. The New York Attorney General, Letitia James, has been crystal clear about her intentions. She didn't mince words. She didn't offer vague legal theories. She filed the paperwork. She made the announcements, and she specifically mentioned 40 Wall Street, one of Trump's most valuable properties, saying she looks at it each and every day. That's not a lawyer being careful. That's not a politician hedging her bets.
Paula, I mean, you know, we've been talking about this for some time now. He's going to try to not pay this, but he can't really do that.
Well, it's unclear if he can pay it at
all,
right?
Unless he's successful with an appeal, I guess. But
yeah, I mean, he's going to appeal, but he still has to put up the cash or post bond, and it's unclear if he can do that. If you look at his current cash flow, he's not only dealing with this verdict, he also had the E. Jean Carroll verdict. So these are adding up, and it's just unclear if he has enough money in his coffers or, you know, if he is worthy in the eyes of creditors or his real estate portfolio to be able to do what he has to do here. It's just unclear. We don't know.
Yeah. And the other thing we need to get into happening this hour, the Supreme Court is going to be hearing arguments in two landmark cases that essentially could open the floodgates to more toxic content on social media. I mean, anybody who has a phone obviously is concerned about this, but for parents who have kids are constantly worried about what's on these social media sites, this court could change basically the landscape for this.
You're right, Jim. Yeah. This case could change the internet.
That's a message, a very clear and very real threat that she has the legal authority and the willingness to follow through. And we're not talking about a small fine or a minor penalty here. We're talking about a fraud judgment that started around $355 million and has since ballooned to somewhere between $450 and $465 million, with interest that keeps accumulating every single day. This is where most people get confused about what's actually happening. When you hear $450 million judgment, your brain automatically thinks of it like a fine. You pay it and move on. But that's not how this works at all. This is a civil fraud judgment, which is fundamentally different from just paying a penalty.
As we know it, because here, Florida and Texas have passed laws that would limit the ability that social media companies have to moderate what is posted on their platforms. Now, these states insist that social media, it's a new public square, and there should be protections for people to express themselves akin to what you have under the First Amendment, which of course only restricts the government's ability to infringe on your speech. But here they argue that these businesses are so big that here they want to change the way that they are able to moderate their own platforms. But a group called Net Choice, an industry group, has sued to block both of these laws, pointing out the most obvious, which is, hey, the First Amendment actually only applies to the government. These companies also have a First Amendment, and you are infringing on it. But it's interesting, the justices just started asking questions, and Justice Sotomayor, she started out by asking about, of all social media platforms, Etsy. And she talked about how they really have to be able to limit, I mean, forget about your hate speech, all those issues. She's just, they have to be able to limit what's on their platform. Otherwise, it would be infinite. Otherwise, they wouldn't be able to do business.
I'm going to start selling my Duke mugs on Etsy if they're going to let this go through. That's what's going to happen.
You did not make that yourself, did you?
A judge looked at the evidence and determined that Trump and his company engaged in systematic fraud. For years, they inflated property values to banks and insurance companies. They made buildings worth more on paper than they actually were. When you lie about your properties to get better loans and lower insurance rates, that's not a business dispute. That's fraud, plain and simple. The court made that finding official. It's not alleged. It's not alleged. It's a legal fact. Think about what that means. Trump's penthouse in Trump Tower, one of the most iconic properties in Manhattan, on the paperwork he sent to banks, it was listed as being 3 times larger than it actually is. 3 times.
This was made for me. This is my little dog, Duke, and I'm struggling on putting this on camera. But anyway, Paula Reed, very huge implications, more than just bugs, disinformation, all of that very much at play here. Paula Reed, thank you very much. In the meantime, we do have some other breaking news to tell you. I'll stop talking about my dog. President Biden is planning a rare visit to the border on Thursday. Let's go straight to the White House. CNN's Priscilla Alvarez. Priscilla, this is a very big deal. A lot of folks have been asking, will the president go to the border? It sounds like he's going to the border.
He is. It's a pretty extraordinary move because not only is he going to the border, he's also planning to go on the same day that former President Donald Trump is also at the border. What this indicates is a White House that is trying to flip the script on Republicans and seize on the issue of border security, especially after that Senate border deal that included some of the toughest security measures in recent memory tanked because Republicans backed away from it with the encouragement of former President Donald Trump. The White House has been hammering House Republicans on this, saying that they were ready to take these really extraordinary authorities, some that would include shutting down the border, and that the Republicans just walked away from that. And we also know that after this fallout from the bill,
he basically tripled the square footage on official documents to make it seem more valuable. When you do that, when you systematically misrepresent your assets to financial institutions to get better deals, the law has something to say about it. And what the law said was that this was fraud, and the penalty for that fraud is hundreds of millions of dollars. But here's where the situation gets truly explosive. Trump's lawyers have been arguing that he doesn't actually have that kind of cash sitting around. Think about that for a second. The man who constantly brags about being worth billions, who has his name on buildings around the world, who presents himself as the ultimate business success story. He's saying he can't come up with $450 million. It's almost unbelievable, except it makes sense when you understand how his wealth is structured. Most of Trump's net worth is tied up in real estate. Buildings, golf courses, properties. It's not sitting in bank accounts. It's not liquid. So when the court says pay up, there's a real question about where that money is supposed to come from. This is where the state of New York has stepped in and made a move that changes everything. The Attorney General's office has filed judgment liens against every major Trump property in the state. Trump Tower in Manhattan, 40 Wall Street, the hotel near Central Park, apartment buildings scattered around the city, the golf club in Westchester County, the Seven Springs Estate, all of them now have government liens attached. When you file a judgment lien, you're essentially telling the world that this property is tagged. The government has a claim on it. The owner can't sell it, can't refinance it, can't use it as collateral for other deals without first satisfying the judgment. It's frozen, locked up tight until the debt is paid. Imagine what that means for someone who has built their entire identity around being a real estate mogul. Trump can't use his most valuable assets. He can't leverage them. He can't sell them to raise cash to pay other debts. His hands are tied, his most powerful tools are neutralized, and the state is standing there saying, "We can take these buildings if you don't find a way to pay." This isn't just about money. This is about power. This is about whether the legal system can actually enforce its rulings against the most powerful person in the country. And right now, the answer appears to be yes. What's truly unprecedented about this situation is that Trump is a sitting president. We have never seen anything like this in American history. A president with judgment leans on his flagship properties, a state attorney general publicly threatening asset seizure, a real legal process already in motion, a president in office who might actually lose his most iconic buildings. It's mind-boggling when you stop to think about it. The man who stands at podiums and talks about making America great again, who presents himself as the ultimate deal-maker and businessman, could potentially watch the government auction off Trump Tower to pay a fraud judgment. And Letitia James isn't backing down. She's been absolutely unequivocal about her intentions. When she says she's prepared to seize assets, she means it. When she talks about looking at 40 Wall Street every day, she's signaling that she's ready to take action. This isn't subtle legal posturing. This is a prosecutor who's made her position crystal clear. She has the legal authority to enforce this judgment. She has the documentation filed. She has the legal machinery ready to go. And if Trump can't find a way to satisfy the debt, she's going to use that machinery. The optics of this situation are devastating for Trump's carefully cultivated image. If the state actually seizes one of his buildings, if they auction off Trump Tower to pay a fraud judgment, that image will haunt him forever. The guy who bragged about his deals having his building sold by the government because he couldn't pay. The business genius who lost his flagship property to a fraud judgment. The self-proclaimed winner who ended up with his name literally being erased from the skyline. This hits Trump where it hurts most, right in the brand. Right in the identity he's spent decades building, right in the image that defines his entire political appeal. The legal reality is that the state can do this. It's not guaranteed to happen overnight, and there are many steps in the process, but the power is there. The state will have to go to court and request foreclosure. The judge will review the situation. Trump's lawyers can fight it, file appeals, file motions to delay. It could take months or even years to fully play out. But if Trump just refuses to pay and refuses to post a bond, the state can move forward. They can sell the property to satisfy the judgment. They might not get all the money from the sale, because there are probably mortgages that need to be paid off first, but the point is, the state has the legal tools to make this happen. Let me really break down why this judgment is so significant and why it goes far beyond just the money. The judge in this case, Arthur Engoron, made a finding of fraud, not suspicion of fraud, not allegations of fraud. Fraud, official, legal, documented fraud. Trump and his sons and the Trump Organization were found to have engaged in fraudulent practices. They inflated property values. They misrepresented assets on loan applications. They gave false information to banks and insurance companies. The judge's ruling was clear, comprehensive, and devastating to Trump's entire business narrative. When you understand the specifics, it becomes even more damning. Take Trump's penthouse in Trump Tower, for example. On the paperwork he submitted to banks and insurance companies, he listed it as being approximately 30,000 square feet. The actual size? About 10,000 square feet. He tripled the size on paper. Tripled it. When you send documentation to a bank that says your apartment is 3 times larger than it actually is, you're not making a small error. You're not being slightly optimistic. You're committing fraud. And that was just one example among many. The pattern of misrepresentation was consistent and systemic. The court calculated the damages, what the actual financial harm was from all this fraud, and came up with around $355 million. But then interest started accumulating, and the judgment has been growing. Every month that passes, interest accrues. Every day that goes by, the number gets bigger. By the time this is all said and done, we're looking at $450 to $465 million, or even more. That's an amount so large, it's almost impossible to conceptualize. That's enough money to buy multiple skyscrapers. That's enough money to fund entire government programs. That's enough money to change the trajectory of entire companies. And that's just Trump's personal liability. Here's what most people don't understand. Trump's team has been fighting this tooth and nail, but they haven't been able to make it go away. They've argued that he doesn't have the cash. They've argued that finding a bond for this amount is a practical impossibility. They've argued that the judge was biased. But the fundamental reality remains. There's a judgment. It's real. It's enforceable. And the state of New York has already started the process of enforcing it. So what would happen if the state actually seizes a Trump building? The process would go something like this. The Attorney General's office would go to court and say, "Your Honor, the judgment has not been satisfied. We are requesting permission to foreclose on these properties." The court would review the situation, hear any arguments from Trump's lawyers, and make a decision. If the court agrees, there would be a foreclosure process. There would be notices, hearings, and ultimately a sheriff's sale. Trump's lawyers could challenge every step of the process. They could file appeals. They could file motions to delay. The whole thing could take years. But eventually, if Trump refuses to pay and refuses to post a bond, the state can move forward. They can sell the property at auction to the highest bidder. The proceeds would first go to pay off any existing mortgages. Then the remaining money would go to satisfy the judgment. Trump would get whatever's left, if anything, and the buyer would walk away owning a building that once had Trump's name on it. That's a powerful image. That's a story that would define Trump's legacy forever. The political implications are staggering. Trump's entire brand is built on being a successful businessman. His appeal to his supporters is that he's a deal maker, a winner, someone who knows how to navigate the business world and come out on top. That's the story he tells, and it's incredibly effective. But this judgment undermines that story completely. It says officially, legally, that he's a fraud. A court looked at the evidence and determined that he lied about his properties, that he cheated banks and insurance companies to get better deals. That's not a minor embarrassment. That's a fundamental challenge to his entire identity. Now, Trump and his supporters will argue that this is political persecution. They'll say that Letitia James is a Democrat using the justice system to go after a political opponent. And there's no doubt that there's a political dimension to this. James is a Democrat. Trump is a Republican, but the legal reality is that this isn't just a political attack. There was a trial. There was evidence. There was a legal finding of fraud. That's not something you can easily dismiss as just politics. The facts are documented. The evidence is there. The court made its ruling. What's really fascinating about this situation is how it exposes the tension between Trump's rhetoric and his reality. He talks about being worth billions, but he can't come up with $450 million to pay a judgment. He talks about being a master deal maker, but his properties are frozen and he can't use them to raise cash. He talks about being above the law, but the law is very clearly applying to him. The gap between the image and the reality has never been more starkly visible. And this is happening while he's president. That adds a whole other level of complexity. Some people have asked, doesn't the president have immunity? Can't he just ignore this? The answer is no. The Attorney General's office made that very clear. The fraud judgment and financial penalties don't care that he's president. Civil law doesn't stop just because you're president. This is about money and property. The state has jurisdiction. The state can enforce the judgment. The presidency doesn't shield you from civil fraud judgments. Both things are true at the same time. He's president, and also the judgment stands. What happens next is going to be fascinating to watch. Trump is going to keep fighting this on appeal. His lawyers are going to argue that the judgment was too big, that the judge was biased, that the whole process was unfair. And they might have some success. The appeals court already tossed out some expanded penalties, so maybe they can keep narrowing it down. Maybe they can reduce the amount. Maybe they can find an angle that works. At the same time, the state is probably not going to immediately seize buildings. It's bad optics. It's complicated legally. And Trump being president adds a whole layer of political complexity that can't be ignored. But the state is going to keep the threat alive. They're going to keep saying, "We're ready. We can do this. The liens are in place. We're prepared. The legal machinery is ready to go." And Trump's team is going to be desperately looking for ways to pay this or bond it or somehow make it go away, because the alternative is actually losing his buildings. And that's a line he probably doesn't want to cross. That's a line that would be devastating to his brand and his entire empire. There's something else to consider here: the psychological impact on Trump. This is a man who has spent his entire life avoiding accountability. He's been sued countless times, but he's always found a way to avoid real consequences. He's used bankruptcy, legal maneuvers, political connections, and sheer force of will to stay ahead of his problems. But this is different. This is a judgment that can't be escaped. This is a debt that has to be paid. And the people who are pursuing it have the legal authority and the political will to see it through. That's got to be a deeply uncomfortable position for someone who's used to being in control. The broader message is about accountability and the rule of law. For years, there's been a sense that powerful people can get away with anything, that the legal system is just a game for the wealthy, that consequences don't really apply to people at Trump's level. But this situation suggests that might be changing. A court found him guilty of fraud. The state is enforcing the judgment. His properties are at risk. That's a powerful statement that no one is above the law. Let's talk about what this means for Trump's financial future beyond just the immediate threat of losing buildings. This judgment and the liens that have been placed on his properties have effectively frozen a huge portion of his assets. He can't sell properties to raise cash. He can't refinance to get better loan terms. He can't use his most valuable assets as collateral for other deals. For someone in the real estate business, that's a nightmare scenario. The lifeblood of a real estate empire is liquidity, the ability to move money around, to leverage assets, to make deals. And that liquidity has been cut off. Think about what it means for a business to have its most valuable properties frozen. It means you can't respond to opportunities. It means you can't take advantage of market conditions. It means you're stuck, unable to adapt or grow. Trump has built his career on being able to move fast, to seize opportunities, to make deals when others are hesitating. But right now, he can't do any of that. His hands are tied. His best properties are encumbered. And every day that goes by without satisfying the judgment, the interest grows, the debt gets bigger, the situation gets more desperate. There's also the question of what happens if the state actually goes through with the seizure. Suppose they sell Trump Tower. What happens to the Trump Organization? What happens to all the people who work in those buildings? What happens to the other properties that have liens on them? This could set off a chain reaction that fundamentally changes the nature of Trump's business empire. It's not just about losing one building. It could be about losing everything. And let's not forget about Trump's sons. They were also hit with penalties in this case. They were found to have been involved in the fraudulent activity. Their futures are also affected by this judgment. The family business that was supposed to be passed down to the next generation is now encumbered by hundreds of millions of dollars in debt. The dynasty that Trump was trying to build for his children is now under threat. That's got to be devastating on a personal level. The question of whether this is a witch hunt or legitimate law enforcement will continue to be debated. Trump and his supporters will never accept the legitimacy of this judgment. They'll always see it as political persecution, and there's no denying that there's a political dimension to all of this. But the facts are what they are. There was a trial. There was evidence. There was a legal finding of fraud. Those things are real, regardless of what anyone thinks about the politics. What's important to understand is that this judgment doesn't just affect Trump personally, it affects the entire country. We're in uncharted territory here. A sitting president with judgment leans on his most famous buildings. A state attorney general who's prepared to seize a president's assets. A legal system that's holding the most powerful person in the country accountable. That's not something that's happened before, and it's going to shape how we think about power and accountability for generations to come. The world is watching. Other countries are watching to see what happens when a powerful leader faces legal consequences. The American people are watching to see if the system actually works, and Trump is watching to see if he can find a way to escape. It's a high-stakes drama playing out in real time, and the outcome is far from certain. But here's the bottom line. Trump got hit with a massive fraud judgment. The court found he lied about his property values. The state of New York has positioned itself to potentially seize his buildings if he doesn't pay. He says he doesn't have the cash. He can't get a bond. His hands are tied. His properties are tagged. And we're all waiting to see if the state actually follows through. Is it a witch hunt like Trump says? Or is it the law being applied equally to powerful people like his opponents say? Probably depends on who you ask. But legally, factually, it's real. It's happening. And his buildings are at risk. That's the actual reality we're living in right now. The pressure is only going to intensify. Every day that passes adds more interest to the judgment. Every week that goes by makes the situation more urgent. And eventually, a decision is going to have to be made. Either Trump finds a way to satisfy the judgment, or New York starts taking his buildings. There's no middle ground. There's no way to make this just go away. The legal process is in motion, and it's going to continue until it reaches its conclusion. This is the moment where Trump's carefully constructed image collides with reality. For his entire career, he's been able to project an image of invincibility. He's been able to convince people that he's above the law, that he can't be touched, that he's too powerful to face consequences. But that image is being tested in a way it's never been tested before, and the outcome is going to determine not just Trump's financial future, but his political future as well. If he somehow finds a way to pay this judgment without losing his buildings, he can spin it as another victory. He can claim he beat the system. He can tell his supporters that he overcame the witch hunt and came out on top. But if he loses his buildings, if the state actually seizes Trump Tower and sells it to pay a fraud judgment, that's a story that can't be spun. That's an image that can't be erased. That's a legacy that will follow him forever. So here we are, at a moment of truth for Donald Trump and for American accountability. The judgment is real. The liens are real. The threat is real. And the next move could change everything. We're going to keep watching this story as it develops. We're going to keep bringing you updates as the situation evolves. And we're going to keep asking the question that matters most. Can anyone, even a president, really escape accountability? The answer coming from New York is yes. And they're prepared to prove it. This is not over. Not even close.